I actually remember noticing when my patience stopped being automatic. I remember someone was talking to me, someone I cared about, and I realized in the middle of all of it that I was just waiting for him or her to finish instead of me listening to what they were saying. This gap between those two things, I didn't register it the way I should have. I filed it and just kept moving. What was happening to me had this weird shape of a progressive withdrawal from people, a quiet contempt for their needs that I'd dressed up as finally understanding how things work, getting through the days, becoming by small increments, too small to track individually, someone I would have not have defended if you had asked. There's a drift that happens after enough disappointment in your life. The specific kind that comes from being open in the wrong direction enough times, where warmth stops being the default and starts requiring a justification of you have to actively manufacture. And believe me, this justification becomes harder and harder to find. And eventually, you tell yourself, like I did to myself, that the warmth was the problem. That the people still operating from it just haven't been around long enough to understand. This is one of the reasons why I make these videos, because I want to talk about the internal logic of that drift. What produces it, what it costs, what happens if you maintain the same framework over day by day, and where it ends if you follow it all the way. Because I followed it far enough to know, believe me, and I know a lot of people around me that they are somewhere inside that framework right now and they are calling it something else. The philosophy, it hardens into nihilism, the behavioral version, the one most people arrive at through accumulated experience. The conviction that everyone is operating from self-interest underneath whatever they're performing, and that anyone who seems to be doing otherwise just hasn't been tested hard enough in this life. So that worldview becomes irrefutable once you're inside it, because it processes all evidence the same way. A disappointment tells you that you were right. Something unexpectedly good happens, it just means this particular thing hasn't burned you yet. So this system validates itself regardless of what happens. And inside it long enough, the distinction between accurate and functional stops feeling like a meaningful question. And it works. Believe me, it genuinely works in the short term. When you expect nothing from people, you can't be reached in ways that hurt anything important. What that doesn't tell you is that the armor doesn't distinguish between what could hurt you and what could reach you in ways you'd actually want. So, the longer you're inside it, the less you can tell those two things apart, because both require the same thing from you. And you've decided that thing is the problem. And believe me, there's an entire content ecosystem built around explaining this to you. You see it everywhere. Now, the diagnosis these videos usually offer is accurate enough. The same content then tells you the solution is awareness, the space between stimulus and response, as though naming the mechanism is the same thing as changing it, as though the person who just learned what a trauma response is will now simply stop having them. The industry selling you tools to reconnect with yourself, it needs you to remain slightly disconnected to keep buying. That's how it goes. A genuinely well person is a bad customer. The algorithm surfacing this content optimizes for your continued engagement. And your actual health is a separate thing and usually competing consideration. And look, because I know this is ironic, I make content. All of this I do is content. It's worth being clear about that before going any further, because the moment something is packaged, framed, edited, and delivered to you with intent, it stops being neutral. It becomes shaped but by what I choose to include, by what I leave out, by the things I say, by how I pace it, where I place emphasis. Even honesty, once expressed like this, is edited. You have to understand that there are things I understand but can't fully articulate, just like you. Things I feel but can't translate cleanly into language, just like you. And also, there are things I choose not to say at all because they don't serve the structure of what this is becoming. So whatever this sounds like, it's still filtered through the constraints of expression and the incentives of being heard. It has to hold your attention. It has to move in a way that feels coherent. And that alone already separates it from the raw thing it's trying to describe. You have to be very careful with with pretty words. That's just short version is this. You have to be careful with pretty words, which means you shouldn't mistake recognition for resolution. Just because something resonates doesn't mean it's solved. Just because it's articulated doesn't mean it's understood in a way that changes anything. Look, some of my videos and the other videos that you see there online by other people, they can give you a language. They can give you the language. It can point you at something, but it can't do the part that actually matters to you. And I'm aware of that while saying it, that this is still part of the same system I'm describing. Even stepping outside to comment on it is, in a way, still participating in it. There's no clean position outside of it, just different levels of awareness inside of it. The environment does something specific that I noticed in myself before I had the language for it. Patience stopped being something that was just there. I'd reach for it and find it harder to locate. I put that down to experience, to finally recalibrating. The nervous system, under sustained pressure, gets efficient. It rations what costs most. Genuine attention to another person is expensive. It runs cheaper responses faster. And you don't notice because each shift is small and each one feels like a reasonable response to something specific. Freud's observation was that what gets suppressed moves. It doesn't stay where you put it. The anger that goes unacknowledged becomes the hostility you distribute to people who had nothing to do with the original thing. So the fear underneath the nihilism, which by the way is always there, becomes the coldness you call strength while it keeps running untouched underneath. And if you leave it there long enough, it stops feeling like a response and starts feeling like who you are. And it's not even because it's true. It's because you've built a system where nothing can prove it isn't. Jung described the shadow as the contents of yourself you refuse to acknowledge, which then gets projected outward onto other people with the precision you'd never apply to your own behavior. The reliable indicator that you're in your own shadow and not seeing someone else clearly is the intensity of the reaction. The behavior that makes you most contemptuous is the shortest distance to what you're managing in yourself under a better story. I spent a long time treating that as an interesting observation about other people's psychology. During that same period, I was doing the exact things I found most contemptible in others, using my intelligence to maintain distance and calling it discernment, distributing a general emotional tax on the people around me that had nothing to do with it. So, in other words, the most accurate name for all of this is being a difficult person to be around, being a piece of shit. Someone who had made their own interior dishonesty someone else's daily problem, consistently enough that it stopped being an episode and became a pattern. The way we talk about toxic behavior as a category of a person that exists over there, explained by factors that don't apply to us, is exactly the mechanism that keeps it running. You can't examine something you've decided you're not inside. Viktor Frankl observed, from inside conditions more extreme than most of us will ever face, that when people lose a sense of meaning, what fills the space is what he called the existential vacuum. An emptiness that expresses itself as the quiet emotional cruelty of someone who has stopped caring about the effect they have on other people. And mind you, he wasn't theorizing this. He was reporting this from 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, watching which people kept something intact and which people didn't, trying to understand what the difference was. And his answer, which was something I resisted for a long time because it didn't fit the nihilism I was living inside, his answer was that psychological survival had less to do with conditions than with whether the person had something outside themselves to hold on to. Something specific enough to orient toward when everything around you gave you every rational reason to give up. I came to Frankl while trying to understand what had happened to me. Why I'd been functioning fine externally while something had gone quiet internally. And his description of the existential vacuum was basically the most accurate thing I'd read about what actually felt like from inside. The emptiness expressing itself as a low-grade coldness toward everything, which I'd been calling realism. I generally recommend the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's one of the few accounts I've read that doesn't theorize about meaning, but survives it. It shows what it looks like when someone chooses against nihilism, even when there's nothing in the world pushing them in the other direction. The book is short, yes, but it doesn't leave you alone afterward, believe me. Now, Dostoevsky got to the end point of this process before psychology even had the vocabulary for it. In his book, The Brothers Karamazov, Father Zosima says this: above all, don't lie to yourself. The man who lies to himself and listens to his own lie comes to a point that he cannot distinguish the truth within him or around him, and so loses all respect for himself and for others. And having no respect, he ceases to love. The lying to yourself starts small. A gap between what you actually feel and what you tell yourself you feel, widening so gradually that you stop noticing it's widening. The contempt you're carrying becomes clarity, and the story you tell about why you pulled back becomes the accurate account. And over time, the person running those stories can no longer locate where the comfortable version ends and the true one begins. First inside himself, then in everything around him. And then he ceases to love. He just finds that one day that the mechanism for it has gone quiet, and he doesn't know when it went. And he calls the quiet maturity. I've been that person. I've made myself so internally dishonest about what I was actually feeling and about what I was doing to the people around me, that the thing Dostoevsky calls love had gone somewhere I couldn't access. I told myself this was just what it looked like to finally see things clearly. I arrived at the end point of a process I hadn't been willing to name. The specific danger of behavioral nihilism is that it's partially right and uses that partial correctness to avoid examination. People are sometimes pieces of shit, and the world doesn't consistently give a shit either. That's all true. Nihilism takes those true observations and extends them into a totality the evidence doesn't support, then uses its own airtightness as proof of itself. You stop testing it, you just maintain it. When I stopped maintaining the position long enough to actually look at it, I saw that the nihilism had been producing its own specific weight. The particular suffering of a person who has made themselves unavailable to anything good reaching them, wondering below the level of clear examination why nothing good is reaching them. Look, the sealed room has a smell to it after a while. You just stop noticing because you're inside it. The thing that actually changed, it wasn't a revelation. I didn't read something or have some moment where everything clicked. I just got tired. I genuinely got tired of how much energy it was taking to maintain the distance between what I was actually feeling and what I was telling myself I was feeling. That gap cost something to hold open. And at some point, I didn't have it anymore. What was underneath it, when I stopped holding it away long enough to look, was embarrassingly small. I was sad. I was sad about specific things. I was sad about specific people and specific losses. And those specific losses I never looked at directly because looking at them felt like losing them twice. The sadness had been converting itself into contempt for so long that I'd given the contempt better names and completely forgotten what it was actually made of. And that's it. That's the whole thing. I was sad and I didn't want to be sad, so I became a bit of an asshole instead. And not a dramatic one, just someone who moved through rooms slightly wrong, who had very reasonable and well-structured arguments for why nothing matters, who held people at a distance that wasn't quite explainable but felt from inside like clarity. When I actually sat with the sadness, something came back to me. Nothing is cinematic. Just the ordinary things started landing with the weight they were supposed to have. A conversation where I was actually present. A moments that mattered in real time instead of only in retrospect. Small stuff, small shit. Embarrassingly small given the philosophical architecture I'd built around the problem. I'm not going to tell you that story. I'm not going to tell you that story cleanly because it isn't clean. Some days I'm genuinely okay. Other days, the old machinery starts running and I'm 3 steps into a familiar pattern before I notice I'm doing it. I don't always catch it on time. Some days I don't particularly want to. But I know the difference. I know the difference now between the sealed version and this one. And the sealed version, the one that had an answer for everything, that was never wrong because it had built a reality where it couldn't be, that version was lonely in a way I'd completely stopped noticing. Again, I don't have a clean way to end this. I'm still in it. Just more honest about what it is than I was. Which turns out to be the only direction that leads anywhere I actually want to go.